Welcome, everybody, to the Lone Wolf Show. I'm the Lone Wolf, and you are watching www.witchcrafttv.online. And we have a special guest. And before I introduce that guest, you're watching the WitchCon presentation series right here on the station. And WitchCon.com is the largest conglomeracy of witches in the world. Right now we have one of the speakers, but before we have them on, you don't know who they are, but you'll find out right after this intro. So keep it right here, Witchcraft TV, broadcasting live from the semi-truck in Minnesota, America. Frances Billinghurst, I heard a rumor that you were presenting on WitchCon. Is that true?
Your rumor is correct. Yes, I am. And I'm excited about it.
So tell me, what are you going to be presenting for WitchCon 2026, February 20th to the 23rd? What is your class?
Okay, it's a little bit unusual, but I think it's very apt for this time of the year, and it's entitled Sitting with the Goddess of Death. So it sounds a bit spooky, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's more sort of an inward spooky, sort of resonating with your own demons and all that sort of suppressed stuff that I think a lot of us are going through, especially in this current era. And so there's a little bit of a trigger warning. So we're going to be dealing with all those suppressed emotions. And a disclaimer, I'm not talking about Santa Muerte for those who might be getting a little bit excited. I personally don't know a lot about her, save for Andrew Chestnut's book, who I chatted to last year on my own show. And I think Andrew is also presenting. So if you want to know about Santa Muerte, I'll say join up for his class. But mine is more sort of focusing on allowing those emotions of death. So not just physical death, but also endings. If we lost a job or a divorce or just coming to an end of one sort of cycle in our life, moving on to the other. And looking at those emotions that we sort of don't process properly in our modern world through the lens or through the guidance of this figure, I guess you could call her. She came to me when I was going through my own sort of grieving cycles, and I just call her the goddess of death. I don't know who she is, and she just basically is a space holder. So we're going to be getting into those really hardcore, uncomfortable spaces, hopefully.
The first thing that pops into my mind when you talk about the goddess of death is the Morrigan. Will you be discussing the attributes of a Morrigan and where she comes from?
No, I'm actually not going to be focusing on any particular deity from any culture, just more sort of on the lens of death itself, because I think in every culture, whether it's the Grim Reaper or the Morrigan, or some people say Kali from Hindu mythology or pantheon is a goddess of death, but Kali actually isn't, and I'll be going through that. People have different interpretations, and these figures appear in different guises, so it's more just looking at or how we could use, if we align with deity, how we could use them as space holders for us. So, sorry, no, we're not going to be talking about the Morrigan herself or the Margaret, no.
So tell me more about the presentation that you have. What will your class be, and why should practitioners of contemporary witchcraft sign up for your class?
So, sorry, I didn't hear that. There's a little bit of some background noise.
Why should witches of contemporary witchcraft sign up for your class at WitchCon 2026?
I think anybody should, not just people from contemporary witchcraft, which is my own tradition. I do feel that, especially how I see my magic, my witchcraft, everything is interconnected, and we can't really, well, really for me, contemporary witchcraft is about a self-exploration. I know today witchcraft is sort of more depicted as being external. Everybody's focusing on spells, sort of like aiding the external world. But to me, when you start working on the internal stuff, your own shadow, your emotions, why you react, why you maybe don't have all those external things in the world, do you actually need all those sort of external things? We live in a very capitalist society. We have a lot of stuff. And that, to me, I mean, I'm also interested in metaphysics. So these sort of underpin everything that I sort of see as well. So the more cluttered our external world is, the more cluttered our internal world, which affects our mental health. So everything's interconnected. So when people, in my perspective, really start dealing with their internal stuff, especially what shadow or those emotions, we then begin to understand us more and why we may react to certain situations, certain people. Everybody talks about triggers these days. We could find out where those triggers resonate from. So then when we move into our ritual spaces, our goal, our focus is a little bit clearer, where we're not moving or operating from just the sort of I'm important space and how the external world reacts with me, but more is like how I can get in touch with my internal world and then bring that forward into the external world. Yeah, so I sort of pseudo-psychology, I guess, and I don't know, I'm just one of these people. I like sort of delving into what makes me tick. Why do I react in a certain way when I hear things, when I see things? And sometimes in our world, because it's going so fast, you just need that space to be. And in that space to just be yourself, you then connect back in with the earth, and I suppose a little bit of a shamanistic sort of slant, our connection in with the cosmos, as above, so below. And then that also impacts our external world as well, and we're coming from a more of a place of calmness again. So we're not sort of reactionary. We can actually bring about the true change from our inside out sort of thing.
How much of an impact do you think the Golden Dawn magical tradition had on contemporary witchcraft?
The Golden Dawn, I think a lot more than what people may realize if they are sort of coming from a more eclectic, modern perspective. And even before the Golden Dawn, the Theosophical Society with Helena Blavatsky, and that whole sort of new thought movement that emerged out of the 18th century, early 19th century, I think that had a huge impact on how we view magic as a whole, especially within contemporary witchcraft. There definitely are elements which are very similar. I mean, some of the founders, Gardner and also Sanders, did have access to the books, or to people who were trained in the Golden Dawn. And it brought, I think what they did, this the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, brought into the sort of public awareness more a different way of whether they were religious or connecting in with the divine to what people before them were familiar with. And that was like Christianity, and that was basically what people did, or they went east. The Golden Dawn sort of merged out from the west it incorporated like the Kabbalah and all these other sort of magical traditions that a lot of people didn't hear about. And one of my first teachers described the Kabbalah as the yoga of the West, as opposed to doing the chakra system. And that does underpin, I think, a lot of practices today. My initial introduction to magic was through an offshoot of, or influenced by the Golden Dawn. And there's just something about some of those rituals that I still do today. And that's probably why I'm an initiated Alexandrian. Why that appealed to me way back in the day was because of that ceremonial slant that we have incorporating through our magics. I just like it. But yeah, you'll come back to your question. I think it has a huge impact. Not just the Golden Dawn, but also the Masonic lodges and those sort of the Rosicrucians and all those sort of orders that came out around that time.
So as far as initiation goes, what particular spiritual path do you follow? Have you been initiated into?
Yeah, as I just said, I've initiated Alexandrians. It's the Alexandrian tradition of witchcraft. That was a little bit interesting because here in Australia we have one or two main lines, shall I say. I was initiated back in the late 90s, early 2000s by someone here in Adelaide, but we couldn't claim direct lineage back. But there's always sort of a current, shall I say, that when I went off and did other things, I've done my level 1 yoga teaching, so there's sort of initiation through there. I have done various other initiations into Eastern sort of teachings. We've got an ashram here in Adelaide that's dedicated to Kali Ma. I've done one level of initiation into that. She's one of the goddesses that I'm sort of drawn to. I've done sort of an empowerment into White Tara. Done an online initiation into one order of sort of Golden Dawn teachings, which I found interesting because I'm very much not online. But then I sort of came back full circle, and a couple of years ago got reinitiated or properly initiated into the Alexandrian tradition, because it was always bubbling under the surface. There was always something that was speaking to me, was sort of shaping my lens, so to speak. So so the main one is the Alexandrian tradition of witchcraft.
In a lot of rhetoric in the magical world in contemporary times, we see a lot of teachings that come from Hermeticism, and also the 7 Hermetic laws. One of those laws is the laws of gender. And I see that a lot of different families and traditions around the globe have had a different analyzation of what it means to have that particular, occultic law. What is your opinion on the Hermetic law of gender?
Oh, lucky me for getting this prickly one. Thank you very much, Harold. I'm going to disclaimer, this is just my personal interpretation and not necessarily that of any tradition that I'm initiated into, just my reflections. The Hermetic law of gender, where there is masculine and feminine. Okay. I think too, everybody's got their own opinions and people get a little bit, should we say, excited about words these days. And the gender sort of comes to mind of polarity as well. We see a world very polarized, like one pole, the other pole, and nothing in between. And to me, gender is almost the same. There's masculine, there's feminine, and there's a line in between. If we look at the cosmos as a whole, as I said, one of my interests is sort of esoteric sciences or metaphysics. So I sort of go out to explain the internal world because we are interconnected. There is a creative force, and that for that creative force to come into being is really, there's masculine and feminine, whether these the Big Bang or the Big Breath theories of how our universe was created. And I'm not just talking about male and like man and woman, how there's an active and there's a receptive force. So it's like sometimes we get caught up in the labels. There's always that for something to come into creation. Even within the human self, in order for our species to procreate, you need male and female, you need masculine and feminine. Within our own selves, we have, as Carl Jung put out, the anima and animus. So everything has this dual purpose of gender. I like the yin-yang symbol from the Taoist teachings, where we have like the dark side of the mountain, which is the black, but within the black there's the white circle, and then you have the white sort of teardrop, and inside that there's the black circle. So there's those sort of polar opposites within each, and you really can't have one without the other, because when the two come together, that is creation. So how people interpret that when they come down to the individual self is entirely up to them. How they identify, it's entirely up to them. I personally don't care. But within some magics, like in particular, you mentioned, my own tradition, and that's contemporary witchcraft. And I know even within some of the branches, there are individuals sort of trying to move away from this concept of gender. Again, each to their own. I still come back to the fact that our craft, or the craft tradition that I was initiated into, was originally a fertility cult. And for fertility to happen, whether it's physical fertility or through the mind or in the whole process of creation, you do need these two aspects. You need a activating force, a Shiva, Shiva and Shakti, and a container, really. Talking about Shiva and Shakti from the Hindu tradition, Shiva is basically the potential, but he sits there and meditates all the time. And you need Shakti to come in to wake him up, to sort of bring that energy, those creations into manifestation. You also see that in the Tree of Life glyph from Kita, the sphere at the top of the tree, going through all the emanations to Malkut, which is our physical realm here, to bring things into manifestation. So it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. You need these two equal forces to do that. So I don't know if that answers your question. I know I've sort of gone on a little bit of a tangent, but that Hermetic principle, I do think when we sort of remove our emotional attachments from things, is very important in order to bring forth creation, whether it's our magical creation that we want to craft a spell or bring something into our life or change our external world, or if it's physical creation, like bringing forth a new being into our family unit.
We talked a lot about the Tree of Life in the Kabbalistic magical traditions. And I think Israel Regardie published a lot of different books about that particular spirituality. Does Judaic mysticism play a part in Alexandrian modern contemporary Wicca?
Judaic mysticism. Oh, I'm hearing my little shackles going up, and I'm going, oh, I've got a bit of Jesus allergy coming through. I wouldn't call it I wouldn't call it the Kabbalah itself is a lot older, from my understanding, than Judaism. So I think it predates Judaism, and from my understanding, there's like 4 branches of it, and what has come through from the Golden Dawn into contemporary witchcraft and the Alexandrian tradition, or aspects of the Alexandrian tradition, is one particular branch of the Kabbalah. So we're not really getting into Judaic magic. I mean, I don't know whether it is called Judaic magic. I don't know much about the Bible. To me, that's sort of Judaic magic, but each to their own. I work primarily with the glyph, the tree of life. I utilize it almost like a bit of a filing cabinet where you can, for people who aren't familiar with it, they've got the 10 glyphs. They all have different colors. They're associated with different planets. So then we sort of like can put all the gods, goddesses, and all the other correspondences into those color codes. I also see a reflection of the external world, like things how came to being or how we connect in with the divine. So it's just a sort of a tool. You can do the same thing with the Eastern chakras as well, connecting in with the divine. Some of the rituals that came through the Golden Dawn, yeah, they do use, I'm thinking of the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, they do use ancient Hebraic god names, the unspoken words of God. I see that as sort of power names, because we're not actually connecting in with those physical aspects of the Judaic gods, like, say, if I was calling in other goddesses and gods of pagan traditions. To me, they're just more power names, and they're representative of the areas that we call them into, the quarters. For people who are probably deeper trained into Golden Dawn, they may have a different opinion from me, which is fine. I haven't really delved all that deep into them. To me, my interest in some of the teachings of the Golden Dawn are, I suppose, a little bit on the surface level. And as I said, I use the Tree of Life as more of a filing cabinet than anything, but also a balancing tool, because it's got the 3 pillars, and you sort of like moving from masculine and feminine, or mercy and severity. And the essence basically is to connect in with, say, Ketha, with the cosmos above, earth below, with Malkut, and the balance in between. So there's a little bit of similarity I see there with, say, Buddhism, where they talk about the fourfold path as well, where everything is to come back into balance and center. So that's how I work with it. So whether that's Judaic magic, I don't know.
In the occult, they have a saying that is very, very popular. In it is exactly what you had said earlier, that as above, as so below. What is your definition of what does that mean exactly?
Yes, and there's a second part to that, as within, so without. I see that coming back to what I mentioned right at the beginning with this connection in with shamanism, that we do not do things in a bubble. We do not exist in a bubble. It's not all about me, and what I do doesn't have any flow-on effect. Everything is interconnected, and I think the shamans talk about us being on the web of life, and this is a separation that we've seen in our own human mindset. It's, I don't know whether it's 5,000, 3,000 years old, if we can blame patriarchy, or whether we can blame Christianity or capitalism. We see ourselves separate from nature, and I personally think that's why a lot of us develop mental illnesses, because we have that separation, and the focus is on stuff as opposed to connecting in with the greater whole. So there, as above, so below. I'll just take some water. To me, is a reminder that what happens externally or in the cosmos, if you want to go into looking at that, what the planets are doing, happens or affects us down here on Earth. So we're talking about the Tree of Life earlier, so that's Ketha, affects or has a impact and influence on Malkut. And then the second part, as within, so internally, is connected with what we see around us. So again, it's saying that we're not separate, everything is interconnected. And I use this, I mean, especially within modern witchcraft today, there's the real big interest in, say, working with the moon and manifestation on new moons and all this other stuff. And I've written a self-plug, I've written a book about the moon. I take working with a moon into that principle of as above, so below, in that I just don't look at, say, the new moon. I look at the sign that astrological sign that the moon is in, but I also look at as above what else is happening in the cosmos, transits, what other planets are doing. I'm not an astrologer, but I do sort of know how to work some of these programs where you can actually look to see what planets are lined up around the moon or the sun, what sort of squaring or opposing, a square where it's 90 degrees, because these have influences. For people who have followed a little bit of astrology, we've had outer planets, so anything from Jupiter outwards, all are moving and changing signs, and this is quite rare. And the outer planets affect humanity, our collective. The inner planets affect us. So we've got all these outer planets moving signs, and that's just a big thing. So we're seeing a lot of chaos in our world today. This is just one reason maybe why we're seeing all this chaos, but it's affecting everybody. And so to me, that's a really good sort of example of as above, so below. What's happening above around us is affecting us. And once we understand that everything, and this is my teaching as well, we're part of nature. Nature ebbs and flows. We just need to look at our seasons, phases of the moon, our gardens. I'm looking at what you're driving through, there's snow, I'm here, we're about to have a heat wave, we're in summer. So there's this ebb and flow that's always happening. And the more that we sort of connect ourselves in and remember that we're part of as above, so below, as within, so without, we can deal with that second part a bit more. We can deal with what's happening within inside of us and see how that affects our external world. So that's my take on it.
So you're a published author with 8 books, Embracing the Dark Goddess, A Journey into Shadow Realms, Contemporary Witchcraft, Foundational Practice for Magical Life, and a few others. Which one of these books do you think is the most successful book that you have written?
Oh, God. I think my very first one, which is Dancing the Sacred Wheel, because it's one that, it was published 12 years ago now, 13 years ago. It's still one of the very few books focusing on the Sabbaths or the seasonal festivals from a Southern Hemispheric perspective. There are other books out there that include the Southern Hemisphere, but not having a book completely dedicated. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have here in this south of the divide, is that we don't have the population for a lot of the big printing houses to produce books that are specifically focusing on the Southern Hemisphere. Everything's sort of like unit value, which I fully understand, but it does lead us in the South sort of like wondering, what do we do? And having said that, the book really should be updated because it's very sort of contemporary witchcraft focused. But it is probably one of my more successful ones due to the lack of such material. And I'm also of the opinion that you just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I've brought in, and this is, I suppose, also influenced being initiated into a Northern Hemisphere tradition. We take the original teachings and then we adapt them to where we are. We don't completely change them, so we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We use it as sort of like a guidance as to how we can reflect back into what the land is doing around us, which is what I was talking earlier about, the as above, so below, and this reconnection back into where we're actually residing. So that's probably one of my more popular books. I'm not it's self-published. I don't go through a big publishing house. My latest 3 are through an English publisher, Moon Books. They do okay, I guess. I still have a day job, so I'm not rolling in royalty checks or anything like that. So it's hard being a writer, especially in this day and age with AI, where everybody's an expert, Reddit and all those other places. But I still got a couple more books in me. And I think basically because there's stuff that I want to share, say a legacy, whether there's anybody interested in reading them or not. Who knows? I would like to just put it out there, just in case someone is interested in seeing things from my perspective.
Definitely see your perspective. More so when it comes to writing about the craft. As a pagan musician and a witchcraft fueled musician, I see a lot of AI models taking over with a lot of creativity and inspiration and life lessons that just couldn't be compared to a computer module. So I definitely understand that. My last question for you, and I would like to thank you so much for coming on the Lone Wolf Show on Witchcraft TV. What would be your advice to younger witches or young wizards that would come to a magical tradition? What would be your advice to them?
Oh, I think if you are going to be a seeker, a true seeker, then seek. Don't perceive or assume that you know things because you've read it or people have talked about it on the internet, especially contemporary witchcraft. And I know interpretations happen, and when I talk about contemporary witchcraft, I'm using it in the context of more of an initiatory witchcraft, so Alexandrian Gardnerian in particular. So that style of witchcraft, I think in America you call it British traditional witchcraft or Wicca. Yeah. The thing about traditional witchcraft in this context, even if Gardner's book of Shadows is published and you've come across it, it is really just a bare bones skeletal manual. A lot of what's being taught is taught in circle and also taught orally. So you do not know. So coming into a training circle or meeting initiates, don't come across like you know everything. It sort of limits you in receiving. And we were talking about gender. That's very hotly debated these days in lots of circles. It's like if you're coming into sort of contemporary witchcraft, these are often gendered, all these roles for gender, and that's how it always has been. Contemporary witchcraft has never been one of these traditions where it's suitable for everyone. I wouldn't say it's elitist, but there is study, there are expectations, because it's all about that internal sort of connection and work, and then you're doing this also in a group sense as well. It is a religion, so if you have come from a religion that where you're sort of scarred, you might want to deal with your own sort of issues first, because that will come up. Again, we're diving internally to see what triggers us. So it is hard work. It can be uncomfortable work, depending on the coven or your teachers. They may or may not emotionally support you because it's not really a self-help group. But through the teachings, and this is what I found on my journey, it was through the teachings and my interpretation of the teachings where there is that deeper insight and that support there. Yeah, be patient, I think. Be observant. Just learn to sit. I think people wanting to learn everything now and yesterday, but they're rushing through the teachings or trying to gather a lot of information. I was talking earlier about how we're in this capitalist society where it's, we're just having stuff around us. Craft isn't like that. I mean, there's so much out there that I don't know, and that's okay. I'm not going to learn it all in one lifetime, but sometimes it's really good to come back to the basics: meditation, visualization, connection in with the divine, with the gods, working in with the elements. They are so important. They underpin everything externally as well as within the magical circle. And just beginning to understand what you as a physical self feels like to what other, like if you're channeling or with deity comes to the circle or even working with spirits, your ancestors, what that feels like. So get to know what you are and what it feels to be you, and what it feels like when other presences come into your space. And that can take time. I found out the other day that apparently people are paying other people big dollars, I mean, a couple $100 for them to write Book of Shadows. And I'm just gobsmacked, because that sort of takes away the whole premise or the whole importance of one's Book of Shadows, whether you're initiate or not. You don't get someone else to write your Book of Shadows. It's, this is your own work. If you're not initiated within traditions where you are initiated, you have a core book that gets handed down to you, and you are to write, because that's your energy. So it's so easy to get caught up in the capitalistic idea that to acquire stuff that someone else has made. You can do it on a certain perspective. I'm not a smithy, so my athame is, purchased, but I've done something to it to make it mine. My wand I've made myself, and all my other magical tools, I've put some of my own energy into it. And I think that's important. Put some of you into your craft. And how you do it, unless you want to go down an initiatory path, is entirely up to you. If you want to go down to an initiatory path, well, there's guidance and a structure, and that's the purpose of it. So that's my advice.
Love your advice, and definitely something to keep sake right here on www.witchcrafttv.online. Hail Isis, hail Venus. Thank you so much for bringing your magic and your wisdom to our platform, into the world, and I hope to see you soon on WitchCon.online, the biggest conglomeracy of witches in the world. Make sure you sign up for Frances Billinghurst's classes on February 20th to the 23rd, where we visit the wisest minds of humanity right here in the world. Thank you so much. Blessed be. Mary Park and Blessed
be. Thank you for joining me.